All right, guys, welcome back to the Mission Fit Dads podcast. And today I have something special for you. I hopped on a kind of one off call with one of my clients yesterday, and we got to talking and we were exploring some different things within his life and his journey in health and kind of some of the things that he was believing about his body, about his health, about, his capacity to get fit, his role as a father, all of these things. And he kind of discovered some of my stuff through his brother. And it was a pretty incredible conversation because what the Lord is doing in him is so cool. And it's so indicative of the kinds of conversations and the experiences that I have with clients. And we got through, 45-minute call or so. And I was like, hey, man, what do you think about me sharing this call? What do you think about me sharing this with other men? Because it's so unique, but also so similar to so many other men. And I feel like they would be encouraged by you. I feel like they would see a vision for a pathway from what you're describing. And I feel like there's a lot of stuff inside of our conversation that would just be really valuable for men to hear. He kind of asks me some questions and I come back with some answers and kind of guide through this coaching session. And this was raw and unplugged. You'll kind of hear my response to my boys who are poking their head in the window right over here. And I was like, hey, get down. So this is very unscripted, very unplugged. It was a raw conversation on Zoom. You're going to see that it's just a random Zoom call recorded with my, AI recording. So if you can bear with that, I think there's some deep and really helpful gold in here for you. And I hope that this encourages you, inspires you, shows you what's possible, gives you a pathway, and leaves you feeling a lot more hopeful about your health and your faith and your family and the intersection of those three. So, without further ado, we're going to dive right into the beginning of this call where we kind of started to get into some of his backstory. And he shares a lot of the stuff that he was wrestling with, what he was believing that was holding him back. So, let's jump in.
And we grew up with a pretty distorted view of health and how to be healthy. I've never, I mean, the first or I'd say the last picture I can remember from like elementary school where I was normal weight was second grade. And in third grade there was some sort of shift, because you can tell in my pictures that like um I got a little chunkier. And so I've never had like a flat stomach or anything, since second grade I can remember, and just always kind of thought that this is how my body is, and I'm I can't break away from it. Um, as a kid, my parents would, I think they both struggled with their weight and how they felt about themselves, and we're on all like crash diets here and there, and Atkins, and their idea of Atkins was going to McDonald's to get a bunch of burgers and just eating meat. And so we'd do that, and then after a while it would just be like, all right, well, it's over with. Let's go veg on the couch and eat a bunch of ice cream and stuff. And
Yeah.
so it was a lot of ping ponging back and forth. And um, my brother and I probably both never really, we just didn't have the tools. We didn't know how to be healthy. um, and never enjoyed working out really, but I loved sports. Like I would run and I would play sports all the time, still overweight, and
What sports did you play?
soccer, like organized, I guess, all throughout elementary school, a little bit of high school, picked up surfing in high school, did that a lot. And then just whatever everyone's playing. I love basketball, would play just some two-hand touch football, golf. Um, I just kind of like a scrappy player at whatever everybody's doing. So I just love playing, but never really enjoyed working out. Uh, in high school, college, like had gym memberships and would go occasionally for a little while, like just kind of those same stints, and then would give up. And uh, so maybe like a couple of years ago, my brother, he I guess why I thought my body type was just how it was is because my brother was thin and he was not athletic. He would not do anything physical, and he's always been thin until he gained some weight, college and a little after college. Not even as much as me, but a couple of years ago, he something switched for him, and I viewed him as like, wow, he was off the deep end, just eating out for every meal, and now he's very strict, um, and he's maintained it for a while now, and there's a little bit of shame, like I don't want to ask my younger brother, what are you doing? But at one point I did ask, and he sent me a link to sign up for your newsletter. And this is probably last year, towards the end of the year, sometime, maybe late fall, and just started getting
As in like 2024?
yes, yeah.
Okay.
So, gosh, maybe 4 or 5 months ago.
Yeah, okay.
And I didn't really pay much attention to it at first. I was on the list, and then every once in a while maybe I'd read the email. But as it got closer to you talking about your book, and I like started paying a little bit more attention, um, some things were aligning. Like my brother also shared a John Tyson message, just his weekend service, where he was talking about his morning routine. I don't know if you have listened to that one, but I started to wake up again at like 5:30 in the morning, which I hadn't done in years. And uh, and so I'm doing that to connect with God, um, struggling to stay awake. But I just knew I wanted to do that. And I started like this morning routine and some habits, and I'm creating my own version of what John Tyson was talking about. And then reading your book or listening to it on Spotify, I'm like, wow, this is just all timing up like really well. And it seems like God is saying something. I mean, I've been praying, for years that like God would transform my body, but I guess I always thought of it as like he's gonna quick fix something. And um so I just started to feel like he's ready. I'm ready, and so the teacher is ready. The teacher will appear when I'm ready. And it feels like he was starting to say like I'm ready to start working on this with you. And and so after you're reading your book, I'm like, this is a completely different way of looking at health than I have ever been taught. And I guess my thought of how people who I've seen be healthy and work out and stuff is that is kind of consumed their life, and their spiritual life has struggled. It's definitely on the back burner. And I viewed those people as vain and not putting the right priorities first, like their family and their life with God. And so that was always kind of my excuse is, no, I'm going to put my family first. I'm going to put God first. And so my physical health is not going to be the priority. And to think that all that could actually be tied together, and um, all always not always, but in recent years, been a little intrigued with like how can my physical health improve my spiritual health, and so all these things are just kind of I'm hearing this stuff in your book, and I'm like, okay, I'm a lot more interested now. And I was actually looking at your program before you lowered the price, and just didn't know how I was gonna do it, how I was gonna justify it to my wife, and all this stuff. But then the day that uh, it dropped, I didn't even consult her. I just said, "Oh my gosh, I just got to do it." And so I came home and I nervously told her, "I'm like, I spent $250 today on a health program," and I don't know where it's gonna go, but it seems different. So that's kind of how I got there. My brother introduced me, um, and yeah, my goal is just like to change my mind about all of this. And I want to be transformed. I want to be in the best shape that I've ever been, and I want, this to be a consistent lifestyle throughout my life, and I want to improve it for my kids. And I already see my son and his body take shape as my mine did at his age. So, me and my wife are a little worried because we don't want him to have the same feelings that I have about my body. So that's like a topic that we're not even sure how to broach, but just trying to not be judgmental or condemning to him, and just but it's been amazing so far that he's wanted to participate and do what I'm doing, and that's breaking down a lot of agreements that I've had about, like, I need to do this quietly. I need to do it where no one can see it, and I can't let it take away from the time from my family. So I have to carve out these little times, which is why it never happened in the past. But I'm allowing it to be more visible now to my family and my kids, and I'm just shocked at what they're willing to eat, and what this morning, like, my daughter walked into the garage while I'm doing the workout, and she said, "Oh, can I work out with you, Daddy?" I'm like, "Heck yeah!" And she does one move. She's 6 years old, but she's like, "Oh, that's hard," and then she walks away. But it's just really cool to see that they're so willing to participate, and it makes me see how much unconsciously I'm passing on to them that I just didn't realize I was doing. So yeah, I I wanna I wanna change my mind about all this stuff. I want transformation. So that's why I'm here.
Love your story, dude. I really do. It's um what I love about what you're sharing is it's kind of meta in the sense that like it on a bigger picture, it's very much the same as a lot of men that I talk to. And I think that's indicative of strategies of the enemy
Mhm.
to like embed certain things and create certain uh normal narratives that hold us back. John John I guess our whole team, we always use in our teachings with forming men, like the the phrase your full redemptive potential. And I was reading in Ephesians 1 this morning to the boys at breakfast, and let me pull it up here. And what he says, kind of like at the end of the second paragraph, he basically says he's making known to us the mystery of his will. Okay, he's making known the mystery of his will according to his purpose, which he set forth in Christ as a plan for the fullness of time. And in other translations, it says for at the end of this time to unite all things to him, things in heaven and things on earth. And in the other translation, it says um, to bring everything together in Christ, both things in heaven and things on earth. Um, and I'm just reminded, in Romans 8, he says that we are awaiting the forgiveness of our sins and the redemption of our bodies,
Hmm.
or the resurrection of our bodies, and the forgiveness of our sins. And it's like, oh, there's two elements. There's a physical and a spiritual element. And God is not just after saving souls, he's after, in Christ, putting everything on heaven and on earth back in unity according to the ways of the kingdom. That includes physical bodies being used the way that God intended them to be used. And it includes like uh the redemptive potential
like being realized in every capacity and aspect and area of life, not just in our, like walk. 1 second, get down. My boys are poking their head in the window from outside.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm just waiting for my kids to pop in here because they just got home from school.
and so your story kind of just reiterates and re-highlights this meta narrative that like the enemy is out to kind of disrupt what was God's good design. And we've also been trained over centuries of cultural uh indoctrination and shifts in the way that we think about being a believer. And a lot of this was influenced by the Gnostics, but to think that this like following Jesus thing is in a category over here and all the physical stuff is over here and it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
And that's absolutely a scheme of the enemy to try to limit the influence of kingdom principles on the earth and in the people that inhabit it. Um, but the other thing that I love is like you do have this like unique story that's different than anybody else, and you're working through that with the Lord, and you're seeing the fruit of working through it. And even though you're at the beginning of a journey, you're already like just a little bit of an intentional work, and you're realizing like, oh, I think there's a different way that I can talk to myself about what's really true and what's happening. And you're experiencing firsthand this connection that I discovered years ago, and I am making it kind of my life mission to help people discover this interconnectedness between their role as father, their walk with Jesus, and the way that they navigate physical health. Um, because they absolutely cross over and impact one another in pretty profound ways.
Yeah.
And so I'm grateful to get to do this with you. I'm grateful that you're already experiencing kind of some of that coming to light. That's really fun.
That's been exposing in a good way. And I think like God has been gracious to give me some, early wins and encouragement to keep me going. I mean, the family being on board with it, and like seeing them a glimpse of like they're going to be transformed along this process too, not just me. Um, and even just in my own body so far, like I think I've never I've never done this many push-ups in my life, and so like I'm seeing my body improve in a way it's like never been before, even in just these like initial weeks. And I just was like, I was looking in the mirror a couple weeks ago, and like it was like something internal in me, like God speaking, me agreeing or something, but it just like I just heard it's starting to lose its power over you. And just that that was it was something I could physically see in my body, but also like just experience in what like God was saying to me. And so it was very encouraging, and just like I get a glimpse of we're going somewhere with this. Um and I think one of my fears, not just in like physical health, but just in in life, is that like I don't see many people through make it to the end and like finish well. And and so that like my dad, just adult men in my life, it's just a fear that I can't finish well. Like something's going to happen. There's going to be some mess up. I'm going to mess up in some way that's going to derail everything and discount like all the effort that I made in my life. And I don't know what that is, but like the fear is that related to this, it's not gonna stick, you know. Um, But I think I was getting a little bit of encouragement through that like it can. So
Yeah. Yeah, you're describing the frame conversation, right? Like
yeah,
you know, maybe this experience isn't identical to other experiences, and it's not identical to your dad or identical to other things that you've seen people not finish well, but you've seen the journey start and people not finish well often enough that that narrative now has kind of formed the beliefs and has created this underlying rule and law, these like natural laws, like, okay, this will fall apart at some point.
right. Yeah.
And that's the, I mean, I think it was at Socrates who said the unexamined life is a life not worth living. And I think that he's kind of getting at some of these things where it's like, oh man, um, the first step to transformation, physically, spiritually, emotionally, whatever, is an examined life that recognizes what's actually going on and going, oh, that's the narrative that I'm believing. And then having this opportunity to question it. Because unless we identify it, we can't question it. And until we question it, we can't align it to, is that true? Does this go with what God says about who he is, his character, who we're supposed to be, how the world's supposed to work? And then you have this confrontation of narratives where you're like, okay, this is the one I'm believing. This is the one that's true. How do I train in this new narrative?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's like Paul gives us so much language around intentionality through his epistles. Like he talks about the athlete training. He talks about um, like disciplining his body. He talks about like running the race, finishing strong.
Yeah.
There is these, conversations that seem to um, provide us a narrative around this topic. And so we then get to ask ourselves the question like, okay, which one am I believing, and how is that actually influencing? And if subconsciously, this is oftentimes not even something we're thinking about actively, but if under the surface our subconscious mind believes that things are going to fall apart, it will change the way that we show up here and now. It will change the depth of commitment. It will change sometimes, like, for the worse, right? Like we will dip our toes in the water rather than jumping all the way in because we know. And this goes back to my conversation the other day. I don't know if you were there for it, but the fears of the ego are I fear that I'm not enough, and I fear that I won't be loved. And this idea that, like, oh, this narrative that eventually I'm going to fail, eventually it's going to fall short, eventually I'm not going to finish well. That then creates the fear that, okay, well, if I'm not going to finish well, then I'm going to be exposed. I'm going to be exposed that I'm actually not good enough and that I don't have what it takes. And if that's exposed to everybody that's around me, then they're going to see my shortcomings and they're going to love me less.
Yeah.
And so my response to that is I'm not going to go all in because that's going to protect me from being exposed and then being loved less. Um, and so I don't really fully try.
Yeah.
And the result is you stay on this side of the line, right? Like you never really cross over for fear of something that's already it's false. It's completely false. It's fabricated. Like people are going to love you more when they see you intentionally trying to improve things that should be improved.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to see someone who never tried and is already a failure because he never tried become somebody that's not a failure because he's trying and he's continuing to press forward when he has missteps.
Yeah. Man,
So
when you said that the other day, I hadn't thought about that. And I didn't realize what I was believing. And that it made a lot of sense, because I'm like, what would I think of someone who keeps trying? I wouldn't be that hard on them, but we're harder on
We'd
ourselves.
be encouraged. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
You, man, this guy just keeps going at it. Like, I commend him, you know?
yeah, right, yep,
Um, so yeah, you gotta battle that stuff intentionally, but it's like, yeah, most men never find themselves discovering it to begin with so that they can actually address it. And
yeah,
if you can break free from these frames, and really this is Romans 12, 1 through 2, like, be transformed by the renewing of your mind.
yeah,
Um, you see the world differently. And it was Inky Johnson who said, how you view what you do changes how you do what you do.
mm-hmm.
And that's such a like motivational speaker line, like tweetable.
Yeah,
But that thing always comes back to mind for me. Like, it's this thing that sticks with me where I'm like, oh yeah, the frame in which I see this thing changes how I'm going to do it.
yeah,
And um, all that the Lord asks of us is that we show up well and we do everything that we can within our own volition and ask Him to do what we can't and trust His sovereignty when the cards fall as they will.
yeah,
Because there's no guarantee that someone doesn't get sick or have a disease or something like that. But our responsibility is to do everything within our power to prevent those things. Um, and so, like, we're not responsible for the outcome, but we are responsible for the inputs.
yeah, yeah. Um, the frame makes me think of how John Eldridge talks about agreements, and
Yes.
the agreements. I understand that, and what was new to me with this frame is, like, I didn't realize the agreements are what I've been looking through this whole time.
Yeah.
I thought it was like, oh, I can just break that agreement and then that one thing changes. But no, yeah, like the frame, yeah, I didn't realize there was a whole nother element that I'm impacting my life in a broader way by breaking that agreement.
Yeah. Yeah. I love John Eldridge's approach to agreements. I think it's a great fit for some guys to be able to understand this concept. But essentially, yeah, agreements are coming into alignment with a particular reality, whether that's true or not, and having that influence then the way that we think and act.
Yeah.
And it's a foothold. It really is. It's just like, I agree with, subconsciously, consciously, whatever. I agree that I'm no good. I always screw it up. And it's like, okay, then you're probably going to be no good and you're always going to screw it up, because like that just shifted how you view the world and how you operate within it.
Yeah.
And this is where, like, the line to cross is really tricky, because we don't want to move into like the secular new age, like manifestation declaration type stuff.
Yeah.
But there is a sense in which we're the only created beings that God gave the capacity to use our brain to train the rest of our brain. There's no other created being that can do that.
Hmm.
And if He's given us that capacity, then it's also a very heavy responsibility to navigate properly. So we don't want it to get out of bounds and be woo woo and weird and turn into this, like, I can do whatever I want and be whoever I want. But it is in the sense that we have this responsibility to challenge the status quo of our underlying systems
Yeah.
and ask ourselves if that's in alignment with God's call in my life, who He says that I am, how He's wired me, what gifts I have. where he wants our family to have impact, and then ultimately what the meta narrative is of what it means to be a father and a follower of Jesus. And those things have to be then this central disruptive set of narratives that bring the other stuff into alignment. And we can train our brain. God would not have designed that for us if it wasn't to be used for his ways and his principles. It's like, so um yeah.
I'm curious what's your experience and what is something maybe I can gain um by increasing my physical health and how it impacts my spiritual health. And maybe like one example is uh when I wake up in the morning, I'm able to wake up at 5:30 a whole lot easier than I used to. But still, when I wake up in the morning, if I'm doing my habit stack, I'm doing like the daily prayer, and like my mind's wandering. I I am still kind of tired. Like I haven't woken up to where I can focus and I have the mental clarity. But I want the ability to tune into God, into his presence, to be aware of it, to be awake, to be focused, and to experience that. How can I improve that in the things that we're doing in this program?
I'll answer this a little more indirectly at first, but like Dallas Willard, his kind of, if I were to sum up his core thesis in the renovation of the heart, it is, we have this capacity, this volition, this willpower that God gave us, and we need to exercise that in order to place ourselves in environments where the grace of God can meet us and change us.
Hmm.
It's this idea that God doesn't really, most of the time, this isn't absolute because we've seen evidence and most of us have experienced circumstances otherwise, but it doesn't mean it's normative. But most of the time, God's not changing us without our involvement.
Yeah, participation.
Yeah, without our willingness. He doesn't usually impose change on us. He waits for us to come to him with the need so that he can. And that's Dallas Willard basically saying, like, the more that you discipline yourself, it's not for the sake of changing yourself through discipline, it's for the sake of God changing you because of your discipline.
Hmm.
And so when I think about this intersection between physical and spiritual, those kinds of things come to mind. There's few things in the world that are more challenging than physical disruption, like hard workouts, enduring a long run, like lifting heavier weight for 3 more reps than you thought you could, even though like your heart was beating out of your chest. Like there's things that we can choose to control ourselves to endure, to realize the next level of capacity. I noticed this in the Army when I was going through Ranger training. I kind of discovered, and you may have heard me talk about this before, but this 10 more seconds idea.
Hmm.
One day we were doing flutter kicks, which is basically you lay on your back and it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so we did like 300 or 400 count flutter kicks, which was like 1,200 flutter kicks. And nobody can physically keep their legs up and keep doing all those. No one did them all. But as they would come around, they'd see your legs on the ground because your abs are totally seized and cramped. And, you're like 30 or 40 minutes into this single exercise and you're still going and they're just yelling at you. And I just realized I could choose to go for 10 more seconds. And then when I reached that 10-second point, I could choose to do 10 more seconds. And as I kind of broke it up into those segments, I realized I could actually push my body far beyond what my mind was trying to tell me I was capable of. And it was almost kind of like backdoor tricking my mind into doing what my body really wanted to do, which was to not put me in a position to get screamed at and put through harder exercises or kicked out of the program or whatever. And so I think what I realized through that season is that the ability to endure hard things and to discipline yourself to do stuff, it opened up a whole world of possibilities, because now I did it with the most challenging thing, which was this physical thing. And it allowed me the capacity to realize, well, I can do this in my, like, I was super ADHD. I was medicated as a kid from like 8 years old all the way until I joined the army. I stopped 30 days before I joined because you can't have a psychiatric disorder, quote unquote, and be in the special operations. And so I didn't want them to tell me no. So I stopped medication and I just didn't tell them that I was ADHD. And I learned, like, oh, I can actually focus better than I thought I could.
Hmm.
Oh, I can actually endure sitting and praying for longer than I thought I could. Oh, I can get up earlier. Like, I used to sleep in college till noon, and I did all afternoon classes. And I joined the military, and I learned that I could train myself to get up at 5 a.m. every day, no matter how much sleep I got. And I could actually show up and do what I needed to do. And it's not comfortable, it's not enjoyable. But I think the more that you exercise that thing inside of you, it just bleeds into everything else. And so that's not to say that you're suddenly going to be wide awake and totally coherent and have deep and rich, moments with the Lord. But also don't second or don't discount what the Spirit does that we can't see and perceive when we show up and use our volition to place ourselves into His space and to receive His grace. And so I may not have a perceivable revelation from reading the Word in the morning, or I may have not perceived Him kind of whispering anything to me or, speaking to me in any way. But there is something, I believe, that's happening to the inner man in those moments that we don't perceive in the moment, that happens to show itself over the course of many months or many years of that kind of consistency. And this is like, God shames the wise, right? Uh, because, like, they think that they can go figure it out on their own, or that their effort or their wisdom or their intellect is going to be able to get them to the next thing or to the next space. And he's like, no, like, you could be sleeping and I can change you if your heart is ready for me to do it.
Yeah.
And this is the whole Sabbath, right? Like, stop working, recognize that you're not God, and that I can do more with 24 hours of you resting and doing no work. I can produce more in your life than you could in a lifetime. And I can do it while you're stopping. This is why, like, the Jews were such an indication to the world of this concept, because they were the in a lot of cases still are the wealthiest group of people per capita. They own the most wealth across the world in most regards. And they work, what is that, 15% less than the rest of the world?
Yeah.
And so I think that as we engage in the physical stuff, it's just creating in us the capacity to make space and time for the Lord to do what He wants to, as we can exercise that newfound discipline in other areas. But it doesn't always equate to experiential, you know, um, fruit and revelation in the moment.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah. It's that is eye-opening to me, or it just resonates really well, what you're saying. And it's funny, it's like, we want the answer, do want, like, I was wanting an answer like practical, but I know that's not what I need after hearing what you said. Like it's not it's something deeper that it's a little bit of like patience, waiting, God, partnering with him and doing that. So yeah, it's wasn't the answer I was expecting, but it's really good. Something you said reminded me of another question I thought I was going to have. Oh, I guess you were talking about the 10 more seconds, and it makes me think I'm not pushing myself hard enough in my workouts in the morning, and that I can do more. Um, right now, I don't have any equipment. I'm doing all the body weight stuff. Is there like, if I did that for a year, just these two routines every day, it's simple. At what point do you think, like, all right, I need to invest in the weights and the equipment to go on to one of the other programs?
Yeah, it's an interesting question to answer because every man is a little bit different. Um, Generally speaking, how we progress is through something called progressive overload. And progressive overload is adding stimuli to the muscle. So if I used to fail by doing 20 push-ups, my endurance increases, and now my actual failure point is like 30 push-ups.
Mhm.
Um, I need to keep adding stimulation, whether that's through weight or through additional reps, to keep progressing the body forward in its capacity towards more. Um, and many people reach a point where, with body weight, they can keep doing that, but the result of the increases is not as substantial as what it would be if I was using weight. And so I think most people find themselves in a natural transition point, um, where they need to move on to something else. But that point comes at a different place depending on the guy.
Yeah.
Um, so I think if you're constantly like adding reps and, increasing the difficulty of the body weight stuff that you're doing, and it just kind of feels like actually it's still pretty easy to me, even when I add the reps or even when I do longer, or, that's probably the point where it's like, okay, I need to go to Target or Walmart or whatever and buy a couple sets of dumbbells. And I need to start, adding some weight to this and doing something different. Um, so that's how I might answer that more generically. Um, I think, that said, like, the pursuit should be, how do I add more? And not for the sake of more, but for the sake of realizing capacity, doing it safely. But it's not until, you know, I mean, as a ranger in ranger school, it wasn't until I did, you know, multiple bouts of 12 days in the field with 90 minutes of sleep a night and running 22 hours of combat operations a day, that I realized I had the capacity to operate for almost 2 weeks with 90 minutes of sleep a night. Like, you just, you, those things are unrealized until they're tested.
Hmm.
And so I do think something shifts in our mind when we're placed in an environment where we are forced to press the boundaries. And this is why I still do a Spartan race every year. Like I did one in November, and I intended to train for it. Um, and that fell through. And there was so much happening in our life that the month leading up to this 6 mile, 30 obstacle Spartan race, I ran about a mile a week. And I was totally unprepared. And I get out there, but in the back of my mind, I knew that I had a capacity that was beyond my training. And unless I forced myself to operate in that, I would start developing a narrative for myself that I didn't have the capacity I once had. And maybe I don't have the strength and endurance that I once had, but in terms of my ability mentally to overcome obstacles, I did have that capacity. So I went out there with no training, and I ran 12 minutes faster than I did that race the year before with more training. And I finished in the top 5% of all racers with like 3,000 racers. And my heart rate was at like 165, 170 beats a minute for an hour and a half as I ran this 6 mile obstacle course. I mean, that's a brutal heart rate. And to keep that up for that long is like, and I was dead for like 10 days, right? Like it put me down. But what it did, which was so beautiful, is it just reinforced the story. It reinforced the narrative that like, okay, I have capacity to do more than what my brain says that I can do.
Yeah.
And the opportunities that I have to prove that are casting votes. They are reinforcing this storyline, this frame that has been built. And that serves me for many months throughout the year, right? Like the effect of that one moment is a catalyst for me to do hard things a lot more throughout the year.
Yeah.
But if I had gone and just kind of like let myself feel tired and feel sorry for myself, and I didn't get to train like I wanted to, and so like I would have finished that time and I would have began to write a new narrative.
Yeah.
And that would have changed a lot about, hard moments in parenting and marriage and business and discipleship relationships and all sorts of things that I have the capacity to endure a lot more than what my mind wants to. And if I had rewritten that narrative, it would have impacted all of those things negatively. And so choosing to go a little bit beyond what you normally do is just a really healthy way of rewriting that narrative. And I often think of one of my friends and mentors, Jeremy Pryor, with Family Teams. He and I have done a fair bit of ministry stuff together too, and with equipping households to be kingdom outposts. And we, in one of our trainings that we give to different families, we talk about missionally focused prayer and like how we pray for our neighbors and ask the Lord for opportunities to engage with them and those kinds of things. And one of the things he said in that training video was to have an extraordinary prayer strategy. And then he breaks that down to say that extraordinary is extraordinary. So take your ordinary and add a little extra to it. And when that becomes ordinary, then add a little extra to it. And when that becomes ordinary, and so on and so forth. That's the same concept as progressive overload in the gym is like, okay, when this becomes normal, I need to add some more to it and keep testing the bounds, and that's how people go from being people who don't pray very often to being prayer warriors is they just keep kind of over the course of time staying consistent and adding a little extra as their capacity normalizes.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes me think of what in my spiritual life has become ordinary that I would have thought that's weird before,
Yeah.
And I'm like, wow, okay, if this is ordinary, like what else is there? So it's pretty cool. Mm. Um, maybe if we have one time for one more question.
Yeah,
Um,
let's do it.
my my wife is like super supportive on board. Um, and I think she has a little bit of concern about uh having the stuff that we used to have, like, like a sugar cereal or something in the cabinet. She doesn't want to create this idea of that we just take everything away and now we're eating this new way, which we would all agree is like is much better. But our kids feel limited, and then once they go off, or they're even like at a friend's house or whatnot, they're like, now's my only time to get something that I can't have at home, and they go nuts, and it just feels like this restrictive thing. how do you how do you handle that with your boys, and creating the right message that they don't feel like once I go off to college, now I can just do whatever I want, and I'm gonna go the opposite way?
The way that I would answer this is the way that I would answer someone who's an adult struggling through this same topic, because I mean, this is identical to what men wrestle with, right? Like we start a program, we've got, a new routine to the way we eat. And what happens when we go to the church potluck or to a friend's house for a birthday party or whatever? Like we look at that and our inner dialogue is, I can't. Like, oh, I can't have that. It's not on the plan.
Yeah.
And that alone is a really dangerous perspective, because it's creating a scarcity mindset around certain things.
Hmm.
I think about the garden. I think about Genesis a lot, and I talk about it a lot. But in the garden, it said that every plant that was beautiful to the sight and good for food was available to them, except for one. And where was that? Where was that tree? Do you
In the
remember where
middle.
it's
Right in the middle.
So they had to walk past infinite abundance in order to get to the one thing that they lack. And God, I think, intentionally did that so that He could frame for them that it wasn't a restriction. It wasn't a posture of restriction. It wasn't a posture of, uh, in my mind, poverty or lack. It was a posture of abundance. You get all of these things that are so good for food, and they're good to look at, and they're good for, like, and so if we take that on and we train that in our children, hey, like, that's okay. We just don't eat that stuff because God's given us stuff that's better, that makes us feel good, that keeps us healthy, that is gonna, help us thrive. Um, and like that's the better choice. And we've chosen to choose God's abundant goodness than his, you know, um, than the restrictive lack. And
Yeah.
if we always think of something as, I'm now taking this away and I lack it, then something weird in our twisted fallen nature is going to say, I want that.
Yeah.
So, hey, no, we got to do away with the cereal. We got to do away with the chips. We got to do away with all this stuff. We can't have that anymore. And it's like, well, why? I like it. It's good. Um, versus, hey, we identity are people who
Hmm.
value, do, because all of these things. And in light of what we value and who we are, those are just things that are better for us to not partake in. Now, will we have them from time to time? Yeah. But when you do this long enough, you will realize you don't really miss them.
Hmm.
And then when you have them, you're going to feel sick and you're going to realize why you don't usually eat them. And that's actually a pretty beautiful place to be, is when the thing that's bad for you has the immediate feedback loop built into it because your body has become normalized to healthy.
Mhm.
Most people, they don't realize how crappy they feel from the things that they eat until they take them out long enough to then eat them and go, I want to go to sleep. I have a stomach ache. I slept like crap last night and I feel like I have a hangover today and I didn't drink at all.
Yeah.
And so that's how I would think about this, is I would start working with your wife to identify what are the identities that we want to take on, and how do we want to communicate the values associated with those identities and how they influence the way we make decisions about what we eat. And then how do we talk about it from a place of abundance rather than lack? Because we talk about it from a place of lack, even if we're unintentionally communicating that, it's going to create an opportunity for me to want to go get the thing that I'm being restricted from.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure, man.
Yeah. Well, I mean, thank you also for listening to God and bringing the price to something that I could do. And this is this is really amazing. I'm excited for the rest of the journey and for my life beyond it, the transformation, and just really appreciate all of your teaching, your encouragement. It's awesome. So appreciate it.
Pleasure, man. I love it. I'm so grateful to get to do it with you.